Labor and its fawning sycophancy to the US alliance and act in Australia's interests, not America's.
Look, Labor essentially has three pillars of our foreign policy. Engagement in the region is one. Engagement with the United Nations and through multilateral forums is another. And the third is the US alliance. That's our position. I think in terms of the globe at the moment, I've got to tell you, I don't think that the US is the greatest threat to humanity at the moment. And in your dreams, well, you know, if you don't think that the threat of Daesh, or whichever title you want to put on it, who want to target people who disagree with them, including their fellow Muslims, for not being exactly like they are, is a threat, then frankly, I just think you're wrong.
And IS is a spawn of US wars.
Good point.
You said a bit earlier, and I would totally agree with you, that public transport and indeed active transport are critical to our cities. So why has Labor focused, and why is it still focusing on motorways? WestConnex, which I'm completely opposed to, as are many thousands of people, is so appallingly expensive at $530 million per metre.
Whoa.
That it will devastate spending on other transport. And I want to know whether Labor will commit to a freeze on federal funding until WestConnex has been independently audited. I know you've been calling for an audit for WestConnex, and I absolutely applaud that and think that's a great change in Labor policy. But how
change in Labor policy?
I would like to hear you commit to a freeze on funding for this appalling tollway system that will just destroy Sydney.
Thanks. What I'd like is for us to have actually a serious discussion, and I'm meeting the WestConnex Action Group, that I'm not sure if you're a member, next week, as I've met in the past. But seriously, it is a state coalition government project. State coalition government.
$2 billion from federal government.
Well, hang on. I listened with respect. With respect, I listened. It is a state coalition government project. The state coalition government were elected till 2019. What I see from some of the opponents is somehow that this is a federal opposition project. The federal coalition money has already been paid. $1.75 billion has been paid as a prepayment for this project. If you look at what we did when we were in government, we set up a proper process of Infrastructure Australia examining any infrastructure project from state and territory governments, having a published analysis of it, including a cost-benefit analysis and business case, and that was to drive the federal government's funding. That is what we did. This isn't some abstract debate. And in Sydney, the commitment that I made was $2.1 billion to the Parramatta to Epping rail line that the incoming O'Farrell government refused to build, even though it was 80% funded by the federal government, even though it would give access to those high-value jobs around Macquarie University and around that precinct, even though it would take pressure off the main Western line that it was aimed at. That is what we did when we were in government. So if you think you can defeat WestConnex by targeting federal Labor, then I say to you that that's more about politics than policy. Because what happened in Victoria, in terms of the East-West link, was that they targeted the Victorian coalition government who were responsible for supporting that project. And that government was defeated. So for the life of me, in terms of the campaign that is going on, if in the federal campaign there is some idea that a campaign against federal Labor, which is not responsible for this project, which has not funded this project, and which has a very clear policy position of where our funding will go, and a record, frankly, and a record. Go to Melbourne and you can travel on the regional rail link, the largest single federal investment in public transport in Australia's history anywhere. Go to the Gold Coast and go on the light rail line. Go to South Australia and go on the Noongar to Seaford new rail line. Go and look at the Moreton Bay Rail Link project. First promised in 1895, delivered when I was a minister, will be opened in 2 months' time. We actually did it. We didn't just talk about it, we did it. And the idea that the way that you get public transport funding up is to campaign and target the federal minister who has put more dollars into public transport than any minister since Federation, than all of them combined. Well, if that's the logic, then, you know, that's up to people to do that. But it's not a strategy to win. A strategy to win is targeting the bad government. And I don't oppose all road funding. I know some people do. I don't. I support appropriate road funding and appropriate public transport funding based upon transparent, proper analysis, proper business cases, and based upon Infrastructure Australia advice. That's what we did when we were in government, but the money has already been granted from the federal government. It's been paid. That's the basis of my letter to the auditor, who the Joint Public Accounts Committee met today, and it was raised again today by myself. I'm a member of the committee. None of the minor parties have even bothered to nominate to be on that committee, by the way. So I'm a member of that committee. It was me who wrote to the Auditor General and got the inquiry into the East-West link. I've been consistent on this. But the idea, you know, we were told that if you elect a Green as a member for Newtown, WestConnex would be stopped. It hasn't.
But will you support the freeze? That was my question.
There won't be any money. I can't be more explicit. $2.75 billion has been prepaid. The rest of the money will be prepaid in this financial year. It's like, seriously, you're going at a cloud trying to grab it. You know, grab something that's real. And I'm happy to sit down as I have before, but I'm not happy to sit down and say, and be dishonest either, and target, say one thing to one people, one group, another. If you want someone who says, I'll be the Transport Minister that will never fund a road, then I'm sorry, I'm not well, the last time I met with the group, to be honest, that was the position that was put to me. That there shouldn't be any road funding, full stop. There was opposition to the widening of the M4, the existing M4. That is something that I support. That is something that makes sense.
So that leads into the whole WestConnex.
Well, I've said what my position is. I've been honest about it. I haven't said what you wanted to hear. I've said what our position is. But, you know, people have to be aware there's a lot of politics in this, and some people aren't actually interested in an outcome. They're interested in a political campaign that's about a federal election. And whoever wins federally, the impact on what happens with the WestConnex project will be minimal. You yourself said it's a $16.8 billion project. The federal money, almost all of it has already been paid. Talk to Frank, someone independent of me, who's not a member of the Labor Party, the contingency reserve will be far greater than any money that's left on this project. Like, it's just the wrong strategy, and I've got to be honest with you and say that to you.
I was a bit sad that I didn't hear a single word about foreign policy. I happen to be very interested in foreign policy, so I want to ask you a couple of questions about that, one of which is for Stuart Rees, who couldn't be here tonight. Firstly, what is ALP official attitude to the Israel-Palestine situation? I don't say conflict, as it's said all the time, because conflict assumes two equal sides. I call it a situation. Number two, how would you respond to an invitation for supporting BDS? Thirdly, you're about to have a New South Wales conference where I understand there's going to be a motion by Labour Friends of Palestine for ALP people to not accept junkets to Israel. They're lovely junkets, everything laid on, but until Israel does something fairer for the Palestinians, people shouldn't go on those junkets. They're my questions.
On the first question, Labor policy on Palestine-Israel is we support a two-state solution. We support two states living in security, an independent Palestinian state that's sovereign, that can look after the people. I have travelled to Gaza and the West Bank, as well as to Israel.
You're lucky I couldn't get into Gaza.
Well, I did, and I was the founding secretary of the Parliamentary Friends of Palestine. I was active for a long time at the time of 1982. I was at campus, the massacres occurred at Sabra and Shatila. I was active in the Palestine Human Rights Campaign. But I believe that you have to have a balanced position of support for a Palestinian state as well as an Israeli state that is also able to exist in a secure way. When the latest tragedies occurred in terms of the bombings that occurred in Gaza, I spoke out about that and made my position clear about those issues, as I have consistently. But I don't support a position on either side that would, I think, undermines the potential for there to be a two-state solution and enables very easily a depiction of a view as either being anti-Arabic, anti-Islamic or anti-Semitic or any of those positions. I don't support the BDS campaign. I don't support the BDS campaign because I don't believe that demonstrations and boycotts against, the chocolate shop at Newtown.
Oh, well, no one believes it.
Well, I'm sorry, they do. There were demonstrations, and that's precisely what the BDS campaign is about. Is targeting of companies, and I didn't support Marrickville Council when it thought about going down that road.
What about apartheid? Don't you remember that?
And well, I do remember the targeting of people because they're Jewish. And I think that if people who support a Palestinian state think that that is a smart strategic decision to make, then I respectfully disagree in the strongest possible terms. And deciding, as Marrickville Council would, see this, guess what? If anyone's got one and supports BDS, throw it out on your way out of the pub. Because if you don't think that there's Israeli technology in there, you're wrong. You're wrong. That's the truth. And the idea, no, that's what the BDS campaign would result in. Because the BDS campaign said, and the resolution said, any company that had links with Israel, very different from saying that should you buy products that are bought, manufactured on settlements or what have you. Very, very different. That's not what the BDS resolution at Marrickville Council said. Totally impractical, and simply would not have, you know, Caterpillar in terms of every building that was done, the building over there, probably the renovations here were done with technology and machinery. So, well, in terms of the BDS, I'm opposed to it. I support a two-state solution with justice for Palestinians as well as Israelis, and I acknowledge, frankly, that both sides, but particularly the Palestinians, who are powerless relative to the Israelis, but both sides suffer from what occurs. It is like saying that you can have, you know, conflict between Glebe and Newtown. That's the sort of distance we're talking about from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, and that will be okay. The truth is, it hurts people in the Middle East, and it is an outstanding contributor as well to global conflict, which is why a resolution has to be found, and a resolution has to be found that gives justice to the Palestinians with their own state.
Recently, Robert Reich, the Secretary of Labor for Bill Clinton between 1993 and 1997, gave an address to the ACTU, Australian Council of Trade Union Congress, where he looked at the link between the declining trade union membership and the growth of inequality. He also, his description of the American scene with its very low rates of trade union membership sounds very much like a description of the contemporary political and economic landscape in Australia, where inequality is also widening, minimum wages are falling further behind, and insecure work is increasingly common, and the influence of big business over public policy is all pervasive. Wright pointed out that the post-war period of prosperity in the United States and in the West generally, until the introduction of Reaganomics and neoliberalism in 1980, was due to a relatively high level of union density, which peaked at around about 35%. Up until about 1980. And in their prime in the US, unions also delivered minimum wage legislation, social security, a decent working week, and workplace health and safety legislation. But since then, as the economy has doubled in size, the prosperity has not been shared. There's been such a concentration of wealth in the hands of the top 1%, he compares it to the 1890s. And this inequality has stymied the recovery of the US economy from the global financial crisis because there is not enough stimulation of economic demand to kick it back into motion. Now, my question is, for those who are arguing to separate the Labor Party from its trade union base, given that the Labor Party was originally the political arm of the trade union movement, surely we should be strengthening our ties with the trade union movement, democratising the unions, looking at new forms of trade union activity like social trade unionism, and cherishing that connection.
I know Robert Reich well, and he is indeed one of the most powerful speakers from the United States, and I fundamentally would agree with most of the things that he says most of the time. I have that little caveat in case, given I wasn't there. But I fundamentally agree with the position that he comes from about, and I think I spoke about in my introduction about one of the distinctions between Australia and the United States is the power of the labour movement, both industrial and political. And here in Australia, the fact that there is a direct link between the industrial and political wings of the movement. So that, for example, with the Accord, not loved by everyone, but the truth is that enabled Medicare, the social wage, all those things to come on the agenda, and a broader recognition by the movement here that living standards weren't just determined in the workplace, as important as that was with enterprise bargaining, but were also determined by other factors. Decisions of government make a difference to people's lives. Childcare, all those issues can be absolutely critical. So in terms of the links, I think that's one of the big positives that we have. Just a second thing I'll say about equality. It seems to me that the sort of economic rationalists who whose policies under this government and under the Howard government are about increasing inequality essentially, about a transfer of funding from labour to capital, put in simple terms, don't get that that actually is a recipe for smaller economic growth. If you introduce higher wages, things like penalty rates, for example, I'll use that as the example, it's probably the best at the moment. If you take away penalty rates from people, the people who get penalty rates aren't the professionals who are on salary packages, they're the people who work in the bar here on a Sunday, they're the people who are childcare workers, the people who are hospital workers, nurses, people who spend their income. They don't save it, they spend it. And that creates additional jobs and economic activity. So it's a downward spiral because that's factored in to people's wages as well in terms of the negotiations, whether formally or informally it's factored in. I did an interview the other day where I said that I worked, while I was at uni, I was working full-time at the Commonwealth Bank and doing full-time uni and working at Grace Brothers at Broadway. I got a job at Pancakes on the Rocks doing the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Saturday night shift. An interesting insight into humanity. When you think about it, who wants a pancake at 4 a.m? I think we all know the answer to that. And I got to see it. I earn more because of penalty rates doing that, but who wants to do that? Give up your Saturday night, every Saturday night when you're 18 or 19 years old. It's a big sacrifice. You should be compensated for it. And guess what? I spent every dollar I had in getting through uni with those sort of jobs. So the economic rationalists, I think just don't get it. Don't get the way the real economy works. So in that, Robert Reich is absolutely correct.
Mark Goodcamp from the Refugee Action Coalition. Probably doesn't surprise you what I'm going to ask you about. But I guess first I'd acknowledge that last July you did vote, and you were present for that vote, against Bill Shorten and Richard Marles about turning back votes and adopting that as a bipartisan position. However, I guess the question comes to stuff that's happening pretty contemporary right now. We've got the head of the Anglican Church in Brisbane offering sanctuary to people. We've got the High Court decision yesterday. But we still have Richard Marles on Radio National 2 mornings ago saying that it's not yet time to scrap Labor's support for offshore processing. So I guess just to keep it brief, when will, and you were in the cabinet during those years where Julia Gillard said no advantage, and said that people would have to stay there for up to 5 years so that they weren't advantaged over people who didn't catch a boat. When will the Labor left stand up and say that that was mistaken to adopt no advantage and to reopen Nauru and Manus Island, and to come out and stand shoulder to shoulder with the growing wave of sentiment and revulsion that is occurring about, the bipartisan support for these offshore gulags as well as onshore detention? If Jeremy Corbyn can go to Calais and do those things, then there's no reason why the leader of the Labor left can do similar things.
Yeah.
I believe very firmly that you can be tough on people smugglers without being weak on humanity. And that's where I come from on these issues. We would disagree about some of the policies, and I don't want to gild the lily or say that that's not the case. These issues are far more complex than, tick or cross. We had, and I sat in a cabinet that changed the government's policies when we came into office. One of the things that we underestimated was that there are pull factors as well as push factors. And that, in terms of the trade, in terms of people, the trade in people that people smugglers engage in, is much more sophisticated. And I went to Indonesia on 4 separate occasions. It's much more sophisticated than what a lot of the public debate is in Australia. So should kids be in detention? No, they should not. No, they should not. Should we treat people decently? Yes, we should. Should we increase our humanitarian intake? Yes, we should, and Labor's adopted that, of 27,000. You do have to have some limit, that's the truth. You do have to have some figure on it. Should we engage, and I think there's pretty broad agreement that we should be engaging a regional framework run by the United Nations, which is why we've said we'll increase funding for the UNHCR to $450 million. If we do that and increase the intake to 27,000, we will be the highest per capita intake of asylum seekers of anywhere in the world, and we will be the second in real terms after the United States. That will make a substantial difference. The issue of people, I know this is a debate, but the issue of people drowning at sea is a real issue. It's a real issue that frankly had a huge impact on people sitting around whose gut instincts in terms of, as a supporter of multiculturalism, as a supporter of people who are, in those devastating circumstances, I'm very sympathetic with. But at one stage, towards the end of our term in government, there were 20,000 people in the queue in Indonesia about to get on boats. What that would have done is to draw into question, I think, more broadly, the whole migration debate, and some of the things going on in Europe are quite concerning at the moment over those issues. So I'm, in terms of the people who work with refugees, one of the things I do to try to make a difference is do it in my electorate office. I've had one person that I think you'd know, because I know that certainly people in the collective, Ian, and people have sent people to my office. I have one person who does nothing but migration. We do, through my office, make, I think, a real difference in a practical sense of trying to make a difference to individuals' lives. Read the big policy frameworks. I think there is a big distinction between Labor and our approach and the current government in terms of treating people decently. There needs to be independent oversight, there needs to be all of those things. It is outrageous, the failure in terms of information out there of what's going on, either at sea or in detention centres. That is just completely unacceptable, because it is being done in our name, and I think it needs to be absolutely transparent. So we'll be further developing our policies in terms of the election. I think I've got you've seen some of it in terms of hands in the air, but there's a lot that goes on, obviously, apart from that as well. But I was very pleased with the range of things that we did get through the national conference, including the doubling of intake, including the increased funding for the UNHCR, the proper scrutiny of what goes on, and those measures in the international framework, which is there. And I've certainly met with the UN on these issues as well. Sometimes some things, aren't always best done with a loud hailer. I've certainly done that in terms of trying to work through solutions to those issues. But I don't, I put my hand up and say, I think that some of what occurred on our watch, we have to accept. I was a cabinet minister in a government that changed policies, and people drowned at sea because the pull factors were just extraordinary. And
rescuing push factors.
Well,
Mare Nostrum, Italy.
yeah, well, I I understand what you're saying, but I don't believe that Australian naval personnel and people that did anything but try to do. Some of it we probably don't even know about. That the scale of the shift in the business model towards the end there, the fact is, as uncomfortable as it might be, that people were leaving Iran on the Monday, going through Dubai on the Tuesday, hitting Jakarta on the Wednesday and getting on a boat on the Thursday. I've got to tell you, those people weren't the most needy, the people who could organise that sort of operation. And that was the sophistication that was going on. So this is very complex. I find the attitude of Dutton and those people, I find it beyond my comprehension, how you could have no humanity. So I'm not saying it's easy, I'm not saying I'm comfortable with this debate is difficult. It's difficult is what I'm saying. I believe Richard Marles is a very good person. I want to say that. I think he's a good person who's a compassionate person. I have had some policy differences that have played out in public. That doesn't mean that his motivation is wrong. It's not. His motivation is good, and in terms of those outcomes. So I think it has been a difficult period. I respect the work that you do, and I respect the fact that we've known each other a while, that you and Ian and a range of people are genuine people doing work for all of the right reasons.
I was going to ask you a difficult question related to my reading of the Saturday paper. That publication comes out every week, which shows up the fact that you guys had not opposed, the Labor Party had not opposed the changes in the intelligence laws that have made us have really curbed democracy in this country over the last 5 years, and you backed all the changes that the Libs pushed through yourself. However, seeing I got the Order of Timor last year, I would have liked to have asked you about this witness K who can't get his passport back, and whether or not the Labor Party is going to support the right of the Timorese for justice with their oil and their sovereignty, because Malcolm Turnbull said that we've got secure borders. We don't have a secure border between Australia and East Timor because the Australian government, previous Labor and current Liberal, will not negotiate one. But my question tonight is on a more fundamental local level. The Archway Theatre, 800 metres down the road, that to me is something that you could put pressure on your local government ALP representatives on the Sydney City Council to defend a community space that two people spent 12 years building up and is going to be crushed because it's not $350 a night to watch the fireworks down at Piermont Park, and it's not $6 million in architecture going up in the air in Hyde Park. It is a community space 800 metres down the road where the last 5 plays were women's plays. Can you commit to contact Linda Scott and the other local council people on City Council? They had the lock put on their door last Friday, right? 200 people go to their performances, and because they're self-funded, the chase is community arts has been squashed. Roselle Markets has been squashed. All the coffee shops, you've got to pay to get a poster up in from Sydney Posters, and they've shut down the Archway, which was costing nothing. That's my question.
Thanks.
And you can make a reference back to East Timor and security laws.
Now, I reckon you would have got pretty good odds on the chances of Jefferson asking a question tonight that I could agree with 100%. But you've done it. Well done. I do agree with you 100%. I think that community arts, and I hosted a function in Marrickville with the community arts sector just in November, is absolutely critical in this area. And not just plays and theatre, but live music. I think it's an outrage that people who move in Annandale disagree with live music at the Annandale pub. You know, like, get over yourself. And I am a strong supporter of the community arts sector, of live music, of cultural activities. And some of the best is, I went to a thing last Friday night, at the Lysicrates Prize, which is an initiative whereby local playwrights get to do the first act of 3 plays, and the audience gets to vote, and whichever one wins the vote gets it produced by the Griffin Theatre. Fantastic, going back to Greek tradition of thousands of years old. I represent an electorate very proudly that has more artists than any electorate in Australia.
Answer the question. Will you speak to
I
Mrs.
said
Scott?
yes.
How's the other 2 questions? Timor and security law.
We've only got one, mate, so I'll talk to the entire Labor team, which is Linda Scott. That's what happens when you vote for independence. Who are swayed by, you know, so we've only got one. I'll speak to Linda. She doesn't control the council.
Witness K and security laws.
I think I've done that. I'm going to stop while we're ahead, because that's a huge win for both of us.
Yeah, my name's Harry. I've grown up in the working class Labor family. I am a fry cook at McDonald's, and I joined Labor Party.
Fine tradition, I was one of them.
Good. Been a union member, and I joined the Labor Party on my 15th birthday. However, it's hard sometimes, and I know you might agree with me, to toe the party line and campaign for the party when they do things that you disagree with, such as the refugee policy and some of the mining decisions that Labor have made. I grew up in Lismore, we've just fought CSG. Those are the things I do disagree with. However, I'm still a true believer, you could say. How do you cope with, I guess, the bullshit that the right put up? And how do you think young people like me can make a positive difference in the Labor Party?
You're doing it already, clearly. And, look, the truth is, if you're a part of a mainstream political party, there will be disappointments. But the truth is, if you're a part of a minor political party, you might belong to a party that has a colour as its emblem that votes against a price on carbon in the Senate in 2009. You won't have, not a cheap shot, it's a fact. And the fact is that political parties make decisions that disappoint people from time to time, whether they be parties of government or parties that seek to influence a government. And there will be times that occurs. I think the decision on the transparency of tax, those changes that went through with the deal, the part pensioners, a lot of state public servants on fixed superannuation who've had their incomes directly cut as a result of the deal that took place in the Senate is devastating for those people, and a lot of them live in this electorate and they're coming in, making a real difference to their income. People who've had their income, some of them, cut by 30% as a result of that deal. Not people who are earning a lot of money either. So, no political party is pure. No political party will make a decision that is in accordance with everything that you believe unless you're a political party of one. So Clive Palmer, I'm sure the pup make decisions that he doesn't disagree with. But I would encourage people, I think it's a good thing. I obviously think it's a good thing that people be in the Labor Party, but I think it's a good thing if people are in the Greens Party, if that's what they believe, or the International Socialists or Socialist Alliance or whatever, or the Liberal Party or the National Party for that matter. It is a good thing that people are engaged in civic politics. That strengthens the society as a whole. And you are better off, I happen to think you should be part of a party of government, but you'll have arguments. I mean, I've had arguments in the Labor Party for a long time, but gradually over a period of time, what you find on a whole range of issues is that, and this is why I'm an optimist, this is why I'm part of the left, is that I have faith in people and faith in humanity and faith in progress. And I said, I think in a different context, we often romanticise the past. The truth is that no one raised the issue of marriage equality, for example, before John Howard. No one. It had never been raised with me by a constituent. Now a majority of Australians support it. A majority of Australians are far more progressive today than they were when I entered Parliament 20 years ago on issues of Indigenous rights, on women's issues, in terms of the public transport debate in cities has advanced at the moment. It's a good thing that they're trying to adopt and pretend that some projects they had anything to do with. I don't mind that. You know, there is substantial advance on those issues, on foreign policy. I think there's substantial advance as well in terms of engagement in our region. The success of Australian multiculturalism can't be taken for granted. It was not, you know, when I was a kid, if you had a surname like mine, you got called certain words. That's the truth. That's the truth. It's a long time since someone yelled out at me, you know, about that. We have got better. That's not to say it works in a uniform way. It goes up and back and up and back. But I think in general, we get better. If you don't believe that, how could you be on the left? I think that's one of the defining things in terms of where you stand politically in terms of an advancement as a society. And, you know, good on you. I don't know, we haven't met, by the way, but I think it's a fantastic thing that you're engaged.
Like yourself, I'm also a member of the Socialist Left of the ALP. I'm often watching you speak at caucus. In your youth, you were quite a socialist, or so my mother tells me, and now you've become more of a social democrat. Has that shift been more of an ideological shift, or more the fact that you have to represent the ALP?
Good evening, I'm Joffrey Balchi, and my question is regarding, do you have any emergency or strategies to deal with any crisis occurring similar to the GFC, which was triggered by perhaps I'd consider the bigger threat to the world? Are you going to bail out the real estate developers and banks, or will you bail out the current Australian residents or prospective first-time homeowners to acquire their home in case similar crisis occurs?
My name is Bill Holiday from Littlefield. Given that the railways have 10 times the carrying capacity of roads, and light rail is something like 3 times the carrying capacity, how can you support widening the M4 when the geographic centre of Sydney is west of Parramatta, but only has 20% of the railway stations in that western half of Sydney?
Trish Reid, I'm a social worker, and there's a few of us here tonight. My question is, as you are a guardian of the Light on the Hill, first question I want to ask you is, what is the Light on the Hill, the legacy of Ben Chifley? And 2 things that concern me greatly, because I work in this area, with homeless people and with people who are having treatment for cancer. Number 1, are you aware that, as you would be, that there is a shameful lack of public housing in this area and across New South Wales per se? I know that that's a state issue, but Tanya Plebiscite was magnificent when she was in her role as a minister. Second thing is, if you get a serious illness, it takes you 6 weeks, nearly 7 weeks to get sickness allowances. You have to actually live off your savings. And secondly, if you need to get a disability support pension and you are seriously injured, it takes you 25 months to get a DSP. My last question is, how does Light on the Hill inform public policy? And secondly, how does the legacy of Ben Chifley inform you and your party in comparison to other parties? Thank you.
Good one.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. You're all very quick. I'll try to be quick as well. The titles, Democratic Socialist or Social Democrat, it's sort of, you know, I don't think matters all that much. I see it as the same thing. Yeah, the Labor Party is a Social Democratic Party or a Democratic Socialist Party. It essentially, to me, means the same. Have I changed my views? I've changed my views on some things. People, as you get older, you'd be silly not to. I hope that you learn of every experience, including tonight, of engagement with people and dialogue. But fundamentally, Have I changed my fundamental views? Absolutely not. I am still inspired by the same reason why I joined the Labor Party. Going up down the road here, helping the people that I grew up with, making a difference. I believe that the power of the state can make a difference to people's lives, and that you don't just say that you should get out of the way and abandon that. So I think it can make a difference. I have an ability to make a difference. I think I have made a difference. I had to think through. Every time in an election I haven't automatically nominated for pre-selection. I think you've got to decide, one, are you enjoying it? Two, on a personal level, two, can you continue to make a difference? I was of the view, it'll be a difficult election campaign, but I believe I can make a difference, not just here in Grainler, but around the country. I will be campaigning around the country. I think I probably do more campaign launches for candidates than any other member of the Labor Party. Tomorrow I'm in Melbourne, on the Today Show at 5:45, if anyone's up and around Summerhill Station. We do, and it finishes off tomorrow night at the Tourism Awards, so it's a busy thing. But I think I can make a difference, and that's why I'm engaged with that. I was misquoted by the Australian, who said that I had disparaged one of my opponents in the election campaign for being a socialist. I did nothing of the sort. I was critical of people who the last three opponents selected by the Greens against me have been former members of the International Socialist Organisation or the Socialist Workers' Party or the Socialist Labour League. And it's fine, but it is, I made the point that if people had those same views, they should run under that banner. If that was the views that they held, rather than try to use the Greens logo to be more mainstream. I support a mixed economy. I support a strong state, but I also support markets where appropriate, and that's my view. And I was quite happy to have an ideological debate, as I am here now, about that. Read the crisis of the GFC. My economic position, the Keynesian response that we had in government served this country well.
Yes.
Part of it was public housing. 22,000 public housing units fixed up at Lilyfield, directly a benefit of that program. We engaged in local community infrastructure projects, the Italian Theatre, that's there in the Italian Forum, Mackey Park, local 5,500 community projects that I was engaged in. The Ashfield Civic Centre for people who live around there, as well as major infrastructure projects, as well as we rebuilt 1/3 of the interstate rail freight network. 1/3. 4,500 kilometres of rail rebuilt, which has meant less trucks on the road and made more difference, frankly, than some of the debates personal commuting on car or rail. We did all of that. I think the template, people like Stiglitz, as Joseph has called our stimulus package the best design in the world, and I think it certainly was. In terms of the M4 and the widening, tell you what, go to Penrith or Blacktown and tell them you're opposed to putting an extra lane either side on the M4. So there you go. That's the truth. That's the truth of the matter. And the idea when you're about politically securing a majority as well as good public policy, and you're not about just winning votes this side of Ashfield, then you need to talk about roads as well as rail. That's the truth.
Not moving any faster.
And there's a debate about those issues as well. But we had to be frank, the Pacific Highway, taken to its logical conclusion, one of the senators gave a speech on the Pacific Highway that said the reason why we funded the Pacific Highway when I was the minister was because of donations from trucking companies to the big parties, to the Labor Party. This is a road where 500 people died from the 1970s through. In terms of safety, the idea that in a country such as ours, you can have a no roads policy is, something that, might work in Marrickville, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work in suburban Australia or in the regions. It doesn't work. And I'm a supporter of high-speed rail, I'm a supporter of passenger rail, I'm a supporter of freight rail, I'm a supporter of, sustainability when it comes to transport, but I disagree. And I don't want to pretend, I don't want to say something different out there than what I say in Glebe. In Glebe, I tell you, where a road stacks up and will make a difference, and the existing M4 in terms of some of the projects that have occurred there, the Western Sydney roads package that's occurring around the airport is good. What it needs though is a rail line so that people can get there.
It's got a rail line, except there's a bloody $13 charge on it.
It doesn't have a rail line to Badgerys Creek. Once again, there's a world outside the inner city. And I have to represent it. I have to seek to represent it.
You wouldn't have to build the M5 if you took the $13 off.
Well, it's full, by the way. The rail line's full as well. You can have rail lines with congestion as well. But you do need to have the rail line between Leppington and Penrith is an absolutely vital public transport project. With regard to the light on the hill, I see the light on the hill as being about opportunity. Opportunity. A kid who grew up down the road here in public housing can get sworn in as Deputy Prime Minister because of decisions that governments make about education that provides that opportunity, decisions that governments make to provide, that kid, my invalid pensioner mother, with better health care through the public health system, can make a difference to people's lives. That's the light on the hill. Not something that makes a difference nationally as well, but fundamentally when it comes down to it, it's about making a difference to people. And that's what drives me, and that's what drives my political engagement, and that's what I'll be seeking to continue to do over the next 3 years at least. Thanks very much.